This is Hindu Lounge, a live weekly show on contemporary American Hindu issues hosted by Ajay Shah and Utsav Chakrabarti. This week, will the Hindus join in shedding the monuments of their slavery?
Namaste, Utsav.
Namaste, Ajay bhai.
How are you doing?
I am good.
Welcome, Utsav. So, for everyone joining us, thank you very much. This is Hindu Lounge, episode number 9, and Hindu Lounge for all the people who are just joining us. Hindu Lounge is the weekly live Facebook live show hosted by Utsav Chakrabarti and Ajay Shah, and this is a show by World Hindu Council of America and the project, an initiative from World Hindu Council of America called Hindu Pact USA. So as part of Hindu Pact USA, Hindu Lounge is a live show. We come live at around 11 o'clock every Sunday, and we talk about issues that are important to Hindus in America. And Utsoda, is our World Hindu Council of America's director for advocacy and awareness, and I'm Ajay Shah. I am the executive vice president of World Hindu Council of America. So, Utsoda, once again, like we did last time, we are going to, we got really good feedback from everyone who joined us that what we did last time was we introduced the people as they were joining our show live, and we were also taking the questions and the comments that they made, and we were reading it out live on this show. And for everyone, we really appreciate you. Please participate. This is a participatory show. We have absolutely one of the best audiences that I can think of, because last the very insightful comments were coming up last time, and this time we have picked a topic that is really the topic something that has been talked about everywhere. So that this is something that this is something that is so important in today's world, where everyone is talking about racial justice, racial equality, following George Floyd's killing. The next thing that happened in America, and everyone knows the news, and is that now there are a lot of this trend started a few years ago, but it has accelerated, and now a lot of the monuments, what I would call monuments of slavery and Confederate statues around the country are now falling. So Utsav, this is something that of course, as on a I think that if I were a descendant of a slave or a person who obviously most of us cannot relate to that, but we can empathize with that. But if we were to put ourselves in the position of the people who are descendants of slaves, who are African Americans, and those of us who have empathy because and humanity in us, then we also can relate to it, that if you see a statue of a person who fought against the freedom of your forefathers, who fought to keep people like you enslaved, then you want to bring that sign and then symbol, you want to bring it down. You don't want to you don't want to see that on your face every single day. So that before I go further, and I have this time we are going to do one more thing. This is slightly different, and that is we are actually going to go show some slides. But so that before I show the slides, I want to just welcome to you, and give you an opportunity to just make some general comments about the Confederate statues coming down, and then I'll go into the slides and go a little bit more detail, and then we'll see how it affects Hindus everywhere in the world, and especially Hindus in America. So over to you, Utsav.
Thank you, Ajay bhai. And yes, today's is an interesting show as usual. We try to deal with the topics of the day that that involve us, that involves our communities around us, and that involves everybody's attention in the world. And so this time, we are going to talk about the concept of how people deal with monuments that depict slavery. And so this is in the news. Over the last couple of weeks, uh, there have been statues of individuals who were involved in promoting slavery, who were involved in committing massacres around the world, being brought down. And that is something that has taken people's attention because of the events that are unfolding in America over the last months. But this is not something new. This has been happening in the past as well. And this has been a continuing debate around the world. And I mean, in this conversation, we can discuss a whole trend of what happened over the last 1,000 years, 1,500 years, about how monuments depicting slavery have been dealt with around the world, and how we think about it, and what are the pros and cons of the thought process of depicting people who represented brutality, slavery, and aggression against the entire population. So this is a very interesting topic, and thank you, Ajay Bhai, for picking this up and bringing up the concept of these monuments.
And also that I want to welcome Tejal Shah. So Tejal ji has just joined us on our live program, and I want to welcome her. And as more and more people are joining, I can see Pinku Dubey has also joined. And I can just read out the comment before we go too far. And or maybe Pinku ji, I will read your comment as as we talk, as we go into the show. So let me just dive into this, Utsada. This is something unusual. We usually like to have this as a live conversation between us, and we don't want a distraction of a slide. But this particular show is a very visual show. And the reason it is a very visual show is because we are going to talk about the Confederate statues. We're talking about statues and monuments and temples, right? So for today, for this show, I think we are going to show some slides, which normally we would not. But let me just get into it, Utsoda, and just get get your views on it. Okay. So as soon as you see the slides, please let me know. So of course, as you know,
slides.
Yes. So this is the show today. Is will Hindus join in shedding the monuments of their slavery? So the Hindus were enslaved for 1,000 years, a little bit more, right? Since the advent of Bin Qasim and his attack on Sindh, all the way till the day when British left. That is that whole period from around 950 AD all the way to 1947. That is not to say that Hindus were not valiant. That is not to say Hindus didn't fight. That is not to say that there were no. That is not to say that across India the struggle for freedom did not happen. But it is also true that the Delhi Sultanate, the rule of the invasion starting from Sindh all the way to Afghanistan, to Delhi, to other parts of India happened. And the people who won created a monument to their own victory. So before we go there, so what is happening around us? And these monuments are now falling. So you can see that not just in US, you can see that there's now talk that the Stone Mountain and other monuments to Confederacy should be wiped clean. There's a news item from CNN, and there's a news item that says tearing down these monuments doesn't erase history. It actually rescues history, because it basically, and that is the headline after Christopher Columbus's statue in Boston was beheaded. Okay. Then if you look at some other news items, you can see that General Lee, who was the Confederate general, his statue and his monument has been completely defaced in Richmond, Virginia. And if you go down further, you can see that the headline in City Lab's headline says, "Tear the Confederate memorials down, keep the graffiti." And then another headline in a television website, TV website says, "From county and road names to statues, dozens of Confederate monuments in North Carolina are going to come down." And then here are all the monuments, a map of US where all the monuments that have been either taken down or are going to be taken down. Okay, at some time or the other. And this goes into deep South, including places like Montgomery, Alabama, Mobile, Alabama, the University of in Birmingham, Alabama, Jacksonville, Florida, Houston, Texas. There was a Confederate or a guardsman statue that was removed from Dallas Airport, and so the here is the statue. Here is a headline. Let me just read you the headline from New York Times. And this is the statue of a person in Bristol, in UK, who made his fortune out of slave trade. And when the statue was toppled, Utsoda, the New York Times said, "A statue was toppled. Can we finally talk about the British Empire and the things that British Empire has did?" And there's been movement to take down Winston Churchill's statue as well in UK.
No, in fact, Winston Churchill's statue was just defaced a couple of days ago. So yeah, and not to mention that in Europe, this trend has been throughout the last 100 years. I mean, the statues to Hitler were immediately taken down after Nazi Germany lost the war. Statues to Lenin and Marx and Stalin were immediately taken down after the Soviet Empire collapsed. In fact, they were taken down as the Soviet Empire was collapsing. So this has been going on.
Yeah, and Utsuda, it is in a way it is it's good, right, that New York Times is finally taking notice after a long time that there are even in the Western world monuments to slavery are coming down, and that is actually a good thing. But Utsuda, that was not always the case, right? I mean, let's think back, and not that far back, in 1992, when Hindus tried to bring down their monuments to slavery, which is so basically there are Hindu temples, the most prominent, the most sacred ones. These are the Hindu temples that the invaders, the Muslim invaders, would attack. They would destroy the mandir, and then they would destroy after the destruction of the mandir, they would use pretty much the same stones, same artifacts, and then build a mosque there. So in 1992, when Hindus brought down the Babri structure, not even a mosque but a structure, there was this huge backlash from the Western media, not from the people of India, not from the Hindus, but the Western media and their holier than thou attitude. And they said, Hindu militants destroy mosque, setting off a new crisis in India. But the conversation that New York Times is now having is completely different. The conversation that New York Times is now having says, a statue was toppled. Can we finally talk about the British Empire? Or can we finally talk about racial equality? Can we finally talk about racial justice? And it's just not New York Times. BBC. Let's just finish I'll just finish one quick thing. So the BBC does the same thing, and they are now commending that Edward Colson's statue was brought down. But at the same time, in 1992, they said, mob rips apart mosque in Ayodhya. And Utsada, before I turn it over to you, I want to welcome the people who have joined us. So I already mentioned Tejal Shah, Pinku Dubey, Jai Bansal ji has joined us, Milind Chandra ji has joined us, and Tejal ji has made a comment saying, thank you for bringing the like-minded people to discuss important issues, touching community at large, and giving them a Hindu perspective. So Utsada, I want to turn this over to you. I know your special expertise. You have a graduate degree in architecture, but more important than that, you are a qualified historian. And I also want to say that Kodru Malanti has also just joined, and I want to welcome him as well. So Utsoda, didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to make sure that I welcome everyone, and now it's all over to you.
Sure. And if you go back to the slide before, which shows the New York Times headline, about the statue of the slave trader versus the New York Times headline about the Babri structure. So there is a reason why there's a difference between how the New York Times looks at somebody who is doing it in the Western world, and they are looking at us. I say us because, as a World Hindu Council of America member, I was very supportive of bringing down the Babri structure in 1992. So the reason why there is a difference is the same reason why colonialism existed. It's that we are children of lesser beings. And that's the reason why slavery existed. That's the reason why colonialism existed. That's the reason why there is ideological push among certain belief systems around the world, certain thought process around the world, which claims that there is a dominance of one section of humans over another by virtue of divine intervention. So that's where at the root of this is where the problem comes from. Now, when the Babri structure was brought down, it literally represented about 500 years of slavery of the northern part of India under the rule of Islamic invaders. And when the people around India literally rose to the occasion and brought it down brick by brick without even using a single machinery, it represents a pent-up emotion of 4.5 centuries that needed to come out. That is literally what brought the Babri structure down in 1992. But, people around the world didn't look at it that way because they were sanctioning the colonialism that were perpetrated on the Indian subcontinent and in other parts of Asia by Islamists. So that's why the reason. That's why we didn't see the same amount of, I would say, appreciation. We should have actually been appreciated for having done that in 1992, but it didn't happen. But there is slowly a recognition coming, and this is where we have to join the rest of the world's discussion on this topic and use this opportunity of discussing slavery and the monuments that stand in support of it, and then bring our condition, our history, our reality to the world.
And Utsoda, it's so well put. I remember that when the Babri structure was brought down, at that time I was the editor of Hindu Vishwa, and we had a special issue, and this was our focus that, look, do not think of this as a mosque. First of all, it's not a mosque, it's a structure. Nobody ever not worshipped there for hundreds of years. And think of it as a conqueror who comes and conquers the United States in a hypothetical space. And the first thing they do is, in order to subjugate the people, what they want to do is say, I'm going to take down the Statue of Liberty, one of the most revered monuments in America, and I'm going to put a symbol of my new rule. 300 years later, 400 years later, let's say that this new America gains independence. Do you think that they would not want to restore the Statue of Liberty? They absolutely would want to restore the Statue of Liberty. And what the Hindus did in 1992, was start of a movement to regain their own history, regain their self-respect, regain their independence. To me, Utsoda, that was this day Hindus started the true independence movement. They got independence from Britain, but in many ways, Hindus were still not independent. And 1992 is the day, 6th of December, when Hindus said, now we are going to start our own a new Hindu independence movement. Utsada, before I turn it over to you, I want to welcome uh, K. Prakash Singh to our show, and also Ramesh Kumar Madhu, who has joined and has said that very good initiative. And so I want to thank him, and I want to welcome everyone who's just joining. If you're just joining, this is Hindu Lounge, episode number 9, hosted by Utsav Chakrabarti, and I am Ajay Shah. We are with World Hindu Council of America and the initiative of World Hindu Council of America, Hindu Pact USA. And I welcome Mahendra Sapa, who has just joined us as well. So welcome, Mahendraji. Utsada, I want to turn it over to you and make let me know if I can go to the next slide, and I can, or you want to talk without slide. Either way is fine.
Actually, if you go to slide number 9, I just want to go through some of the monuments that are very familiar to us, and then some that are not familiar to us, and just go through a small history. Walk down the history lanes, and bring it to the attention of the people about our history and our travails, if you can say so. The tragedy that our ancestors went through, and how it relates to the history of the people around the world who have been subjugated and who have been trampled upon, and now we are talking about them. So, Qutub Minar, I'm sure most people in India have heard the name of Qutub Minar, and I'm also sure that many of them have actually visited it. So Qutub Minar is essentially what represents the first major, in the present geography of India, the first major monument to the slavery of India. And it was built by Qutbuddin Aybak, who was a Turkish Islamist who conquered India around that period of time, the northern part of India, and built a Kabatul Islam mosque, which essentially translates as the Mosque of Victory on India, and used about 72 Hindu temples in that area, tore them down, and used it to build that particular complex. And it is important for us to know this because we have to understand the mindset of the people who did it and why they did it. So by using broken pieces of temples, it is a psychological tool. It reminds you of your defeat for times immemorial. Even now, when we see the footsteps of these monuments paved with the broken statues, the broken icons of the temples that we revered for thousands of years, it tells us that we were defeated. And that was the purpose. It was the psychological domination by these individuals who represented a certain belief system and a certain ideology. And that's why they did it. So I just wanted to bring, one of the most important monuments in India, and often it's promoted as a tourist spot for people around the world to go and visit. So that was one of them. So if you go to the next slide.
And Utsada, as I go there, I have visited Qutub Minar, and it is really, how insulting is it to look at the stairs, and how insulting and how heart-stirring it is to look at the stairs that you have to put your feet on, all the Hindu murtis and all the Hindu statues. It really it's gut-wrenching to see that.
It is meant to be exactly what it is. It is meant to remind you that you were enslaved and defeated. And it reminds us still today, even though we have recovered as a civilization, we have recovered as a country, as a people in some areas. There are other parts of the Indian subcontinent and Asia that we haven't recovered. So, but it reminds us of that slavery, of that colonialism. So this slide, I just wanted to show some of the lesser known monuments that we will never be probably able to recover in our generation. And I picked up some of the temple pictures that exist today. These are pictures from the last couple of years in what is called the Salt Range River Valley, which is basically the river valley region between Rawalpindi, which is in Pakistan, the capital of Pakistan, Islamabad is right on top of it, and what is Mirpur, which is right next to the border of India in Kashmir. So there the 4 or 5 rivers that go through that region, and that entire river valley was full of temples. And I have selected some of the pictures of these temples, very beautiful temples. And since the aggression of Mahmud Ghaznavi around the 11th century, he came down from Khorasan, and he literally destroyed each of them, and people after him literally destroyed each of them and never allowed them to come up again. And if you go to Pakistan today, the people there actually don't even recognize these temples, because they are the people who accepted that slavery and became part of it. So they perpetuated what was imposed upon them, and after 400 years, 500 years, 600 years of that slavery continuing, now they're part of it. And they take pride in the fact that these monuments have been destroyed, even though they fully recognize, at least most of them do, that those who actually destroyed these monuments were invaders, and those whose monuments were destroyed were their own ancestors. But the water has gone down the river too far for them.
So, Utsara, I don't share your pessimism, because I think that in our lifetime, at least in my lifetime, I have seen the Berlin Wall come down. I have seen the Soviet Union, which was very powerful and mighty at one time, not exist anymore. So I don't share the pessimism. I am highly optimistic that in our lifetimes we will see the monuments to Hindu slavery being reclaimed and restored, and made it back to the glorious temples that they were once. So I live in a world of optimism, but realism, and I think it will take a lot of work. It will take a lot of sacrifice, and it will take a lot of New York Times headlines. But we will reclaim the monuments to Hindu slavery and restore them to the great mandirs that they were once. I am absolutely convinced in my mind and in my heart that we will do that, and we'll live to see that in our generation.
It's good that you brought up. It's funny, but it's still good that you brought up that it will require a lot of New York Times headlines. But in a way, you are right. I would be happy to one day see Washington Post or New York Times have an article right next to an article of how Confederacy is being taken apart, and its monuments are being taken apart, and the slave trades and its monuments are being taken apart. I would like to see a page right next to it, an article right next to it with these pictures, and saying, hey, when are we restoring these ones? And if they can restore Bamiyan, why not these? It's the same thing.
Indeed. I want to welcome Amit Desai, and he has said, what we give our upcoming generations, our Indian true voice, is result as of Satyameva Jayate, following all Indians' responsibility, like we manage our home, families, member care. So he's basically saying that the spirit of Satyameva Jayate has to pass on to the next generation, and they have to carry the torch and carrying out the work of, I'm assuming what he means is carrying out the work of reclaiming these monuments. But
so we can go to the next slide. And I just thought I wanted to share this because, this is something that people in the Indian subcontinent are very much, involved with and talking about all the time. And that is because the chief minister of one of the most populous states in that part of the world, I would say the most popular state in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, all these areas combined, the most popular state would be Uttar Pradesh, populous state. And the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh comes from a tradition of monks who actually used to live and intellectually work in this place called Tilla Jogia, which is near Rawalpindi in Pakistan. And that place, Tilla Jogia is a Punjabi word, which, a Punjabi phrase which translates the hill of the yogis. And Tilla Jogia used to be the place, a center for the Gorakhnath, Gorakhnath being Lord, Shiva, and the monks used to live there and have their intellectual growth and discussion and conversation, and the tradition was very, very powerful in that area. And this is right in, again, in that same salt range area between Rawalpindi and what is Pakistan occupied Kashmir today. And so this is gone now. Tilla Jogia is nowadays used by the Pakistani Air Force as a firing range, where they test their weapons and practice firing at monuments like these. So, this if this doesn't tell you how colonialism and slavery affects people's mind, then I think there is no other example. But I am not sure how. I would like to have a poll. People should comment here on our message board and see how many of the people who are listening to us had actually heard about this place. I would be very curious, because I think this place is very important and we don't know about it. I think most people don't know about it.
You brought up a really good point, because there is a comment from Abhishek Bhattacharya, who just joined us, and I want to welcome him. And he said that, do you think, and it's to the point that you're making, and he says, do you think our education system in India need to incorporate these facts deeply in our history books? Awareness and knowledge is the first step, as we discussed last week. And he also says, also you may share, will you be able to share the slides? And Milind Chandra says that he never heard about Tilla Jogian. So Utsada, you should comment, but I also want to bring it. And Abhishek Bhattacharya says he had not heard about Tilla Jogian either. Utsada, I want to before you comment, I want to say one thing, and that is, it is not just Hindus in India to know this. It is for the entire world to know this, because Hindus in India, let's say you put it in the textbook, in the Indian textbook. Yes, Indians will know, Hindus, non-Hindu, Indians will know. But I think we would want this to be known to the entire world, because there is a lesson here for the whole world. And the lesson is that you need to stand strong in order to defend what is good, in your region, in your country, in your society, in your dharma. If you cannot stand strong, someone who temporarily has a better military prowess will come, and they will forever destroy what existed. And we saw that happen in Syria. ISIS did the same thing in Syria, right? So before I turn it over to you, I would like to welcome Madhuri Dipti Reddy, and she said that she just heard about this also. So that I turn it over to you, and please do comment on the need for the entire world to know, and what ISIS did in Syria in destroying thousands of years old monuments.
I'm glad, Ajay Bhai, that you brought up Islamic State, or ISIS as it's known nowadays in the West. What ISIS did is basically a continuation of what happened, 1,000 years ago in Tilla Jogia, or in the Kushab Valley, or 500 years ago in Ayodhya, when the Babri was built. It literally is a continuation of that same ideological stream of thought. And the reason it does, and it will continue to do it in future, is because it comes from a very core of their belief system and their ideology, the religious ideology that they practice. And this is important for us, that just as we discuss, it is important for us in the West, those of us who live in the West, that's just as we talk about taking down the monuments to slavery, we need to talk about rebuilding the monuments that were brought down during the slavery. So this is an example of that. And if you go to the next slide, something that Abhishek Bhattacharya would relate to, because with his I am assuming he's from Bengal with the last name Bhattacharya. This is right in front of us in Bengal. It is called Adina Mosque. It's the largest mosque in Bengal. It was the largest mosque in Bengal for most of its history under Islamic rule, which was about 700 years of history. And this mosque was basically built by destroying a Shiva temple called the Adinath temple, and was built in 1358 and around the 1350s. And I mean, this is something that should be taught in the history books of Bengal, since Abhishek brought about in the conversation about history books and why these things are not mentioned in the history book. I'm not sure if this is discussed in the history books of Bengal, and I can assure you, I myself know of another 5 or 10 places in Bengal of this scale and importance. I'm not talking about a small neighborhood temple or monument that was brought down during our slavery. This is huge. This is, that's Constantinople of Bengal, if I can put it in the context of the Western audience. This is the Hagia Sophia of Bengal, and we don't talk about it. We simply don't talk about it. So we can go to the next slide. This I wanted to bring up because this is a success story without much ado, if I can put it that way. And this is the Somnath temple. I'm sure most people have heard about it. And it is something that is actually mentioned and taught more relevantly in the Indian history books. It's not taught in the history books of other South Asian countries and other Asian countries, but it is also taught in the history books of Pakistan, because to Pakistan, it represents the recovery of the Hindus from slavery. And it is such an important sore thumb in their eyes that in 1965, when the Pakistani army invaded Jammu and Kashmir, and there was a real war that broke out, full-scale war that broke out between the two countries, the Pakistani Navy actually dispatched ships to station themselves away from the coast of Gujarat, which is very close to Karachi, by the way. And they attempted to shell and break this temple down. That's how important it was psychologically for them. So they made multiple attempts to shell and destroy the Somnath temple. And that's how important these things are psychologically to the conquered and the conqueror. Since Pakistanis believe they are the conquerors and represent the legacy of slavery in the Indian subcontinent on behalf of the Islamists, even though they themselves are children of the slaves. So
I've been to Somnath multiple times, and there's an interesting history. Somnath was not attacked once; it was attacked multiple times. It was plundered multiple times, and it was looted multiple times and destroyed. And every time Somnath was brought up, has sprung up back. It is really interesting that at one time, after the independence, Pakistan wanted that piece, which is actually quite, it's on the other side of the bay, on the Indian side, right? But Pakistan wanted just that piece of land, and there was this Nawab there who would not leave, and then for some a lot of historic events happened, and he left overnight. The next morning, Sardar Patel, who was the Deputy Prime Minister of India, and Kanhaiyalal Maniklal Munshi, who was one of the key people in not just in the Constituent Assembly but also the founder of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, and a person who actually wrote a book on Somnath. He is a prolific writer. He wrote a book called Gujarat No Nath. It's a Gujarati book about the history of Somnath, and he chronicles all the events related to Somnath. And these two people, and by the way, Kanhaiyalal Maniklal Munshi was also one of the people, along with Sardar Patel, who was instrumental in unifying India with all these 539 little principalities that were scattered all around, with little kings and nawabs everywhere, and making it into a cohesive Indian union. So both of them, the very next morning, were there. The very next morning, they declared that they are going to build the grand temple of Somnath, Mandir of Somnath over there, and they started the work next day. Contrast that, Utsauda, with all the mandirs that were in Uttar Pradesh and other areas. Ram Janmabhoomi, the Kashi Vishwanath, the Krishna Janmabhoomi, and a whole bunch of other mandirs. Think about who had a greater say in that area, in that region, and who did not allow reclamation of those mandirs. And Utsada, I want to read out what Abhishek said, that he can't agree with you more in what you said about Somnath. So I'll move on to the next one. But please, I welcome your comment on what I just said.
Yeah, Ajay, I mean, you have it's Somnath. That's why I said Somnath is a good example of what can be done without much ado. And I often get into conversation with people of multiple ideological backgrounds about what is the need for this. Like, why do you want to reclaim the monuments that you had that were taken down during your slavery? The people, just build a hospital there. That's the most common epithet, that comes down our thought process. Like, build a school there, build a hospital there. I don't mind building a hospital and a school right with it. It is important. Everything is important. But what I find funny is that those are the same people who keep advising us, hey, what's the need for revisiting history? That are right now super excited about bringing down statues to Confederate slave traders and Confederate generals, and we're more than happy to do the same to Hitler statues in after World War II. So,
or Lenin statue after communism was.
I think some of them were not that happy when Lenin statue was brought. So it represents their ideological backgrounds as well. But it is important. It is important that I am happy that the statues that represented slave trade in Europe were brought down. I am happy that they are being brought down. History is being revisited. It needs to be revisited. But I would be very happy if the people who talk about this, as much as mention this, we can take care of many of the other things. It's our history, it's our heritage. We will work hard to bring them back to life for millennia to come. But Vienna wasn't conquered in a day, or was never conquered. So let's hope we can regain back our history. So coming to Hampi, I think this is very important for everybody in the world to know. And this is basically what you talked about ISIS in Syria. Hampi was brought down and literally torn down by the Confederacy of Islamic rulers who won that region after almost 300 years of attempt to take it over after the Battle of Talikota in 1565. And Hampi has been described by Portuguese travelers as the most beautiful city in the entire world. And this is at a time when Rome and Vienna and Paris and colonialism was beginning, and there were cities in Europe and other parts of Asia that were very beautiful and big. But Hampi represented a unique city which was torn down within a couple of years after the destruction of the Vijayanagara Empire after the Battle of Talikota. So this is an example of that. And I wanted, people in India should know about this. People in the world should know about this. Next slide, please.
So I just want to read out what Madhuri Dipti Reddy said. He said, really an eye-opener for me, although I heard about this place, but nothing about history. And that is because the history, at least the way it is taught in India or around the world, never talks about any of this. And unless unless you really go digging for this information, you're not going to find it. Because the history as written by the JNU historian Utsada says that if you ever bring these things up, you are causing communal disharmony, right?
Ajay bhai, I'm a very secular person, so I don't single out JNU or any other institutions. I think this is a larger malice, and but you're right. I mean, I won't disagree with you, but this is a larger malice. It's a global malice, and we have to work against these odds that are thrown our way from institutions that are deeply ingrained in the process. So we are swimming against the stream here, and we'll have to do that.
Right, and so I think no Hindu, no true Hindu, can would ever say that they don't believe in Ekam Sata Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, or the truth is one, but the wise or the sage see it in different ways, right? So we are all saying exactly this. We absolutely are on the side of Sarva Dharma Sambhav, where we want to live peacefully with everyone else, but that is not at the expense of knowing history and not at the expense of learning from history. Because even if you're on the left of the ideological spectrum or right of the ideological spectrum, you still want to have the compassion that you don't want to be enslaved, and you don't want to endorse slavery, and you don't want peaceful people to be attacked and enslaved. So I think if you want to really take a true secular view, it is to say that we are against any kind of attack on a peaceful country, a peaceful dharmic tradition. And, how can you be secular and condone the kind of atrocities that were committed against Hindus? For people who are just joining us, this is Hindu Lounge, episode number 9, and it is an initiative of World Hindu Council of America. So, World Hindu Council of America has recently announced the formation of something called Hindu Pact, which is a public affairs policy research and advocacy collective in America. And one of our projects is Hindu Lounge. And it's Utsav Chakrabarti, who's the Director of Advocacy and Awareness for World Hindu Council of America, and Ajay Shah, and we are the co-hosts. So I'll turn it over to Utsav for the next two slides that you're going to show, and a couple of more, right?
Right. So, I mean, this one, this one is I think most people in India and in most parts of the world who follow the news from the Indian subcontinent know about this. One of them, the one on the right, the Ram Janmabhoomi temple, after 150 years of legal litigations, finally there is going to be a rebuilding of the monument there. So that's a good news. The one on the left still have a long way to go, but it's going to happen. And I think ideally I would want it to be along the same road, along the same path that the Somnath temple was built, where people across the communities in the world come together and say, look, this represents slavery, this represents colonialism. Let's make Kashi Vishwanath temple there and remove the signs of slavery forever. And I think ideally that would be the best way to go about doing it. Next slide, please. So we have a couple of more examples of monuments that represent this sad part of our history, and we can keep going for a couple of more slides, Ajay bhai. The Vijaya temple, Bhojshala temple. Actually, this is something I think there needs to be a separate conversation and discussion on the modus operandi in which some of these places were colonized and destroyed, because many of these monuments were conquered, like the Somnath temple or the Martan temple in Kashmir, as a symbol of aggression. The conquerors came, they enslaved the local population, they kidnapped as many people as they could, killed as many as they could, and then they spent the next couple of weeks and months destroying every symbol of self identity and pride of the conquered population, which happened to be the Hindus here. But there were other monuments, especially like the one, the Bhojshala monument that you see on the right there, where it was a slow process of good cop, bad cop that was done to take over these Hindu monuments and impose a very gradual enslavement of the local population. And that is something I would want you, Ajay bhai, to dedicate a whole show about how surreptitious colonization happened in the subcontinent, and the modus operandi of the people behind it, and the organizations, the groups behind it, and the whole thing was so well organized and so well supported all the way back from the caliphate in Syria and Iraq, that we need to dedicate a separate show on each of these monuments, and I will be happy to work on it at some point of time.
I think absolutely the need of the hour. I also want to point out, Utsoda, that there's a lot of reference material available on the internet, and there are several books published on this. And for those people who want to explore more, We will, at the end of this, we'll give out some references so you can look at it. But before we go next to anything next, I just want to remind everyone that uh, everyone waits for this one last segment that we always have, and that is Hindu Hater of the Week. And you would not want to miss who Utsoda has picked for this week. And we also always have a Hindu Seva or Charity Act of the Week. So Utsoda will reveal both of them towards the end. And but let's couple of more examples, Utsoda. Or that was about it. I think we'll because we're coming towards the end of our time. So let me get out of this screen share, Utsoda, and talk about a couple of other issues that are what we would consider to be normal news item. So one news item, Utsoda, that caught my eyes, and I want to get your take on it, is is in Uttar Pradesh, for example, in Jaunpur, the there were 34 people who got arrested who set Dalit houses on fire in Jaunpur. And so I had to really try hard to find this news item because no news paper, mainstream newspaper, reported this. It didn't become a news in any of the international media, but 34, 34 people got arrested. They must have destroyed dozens of houses. So my question for you is, why do these news items never get printed in the mainstream newspapers?
Well, Ajay bhai, it depends on who are the perpetrators. When the perpetrators don't fit the narrative that many of the newspapers want to promote, you don't have news coming out the way honestly as it should be. And but that is something that is not unique to the Indian subcontinent or that part of Asia. It's something that's all over the world. And I think this is happening because news and media is now tainted by ideology. It's not like it was not before, it was, but now it's more blatant. And it's also easier to catch them now because there are multiple sources and there are open source information available that can often, just like you caught it, there are people who are now able to catch it. So the people who run those Dalit houses are not the people want to expose, the media organizations want to expose, because they don't fit their narrative of who perpetuates caste violence in India.
It's so blatant, okay, that you may recall that a couple of weeks ago, in a very sad incident in Kerala, where an elephant, pregnant elephant, who was about 5 or 6 years old, ate a coconut, which was basically booby trapped. It had explosives in it, and the elephant, basically, I don't want to go into the gory details, but elephant died over a period of 5 days. And the news items that all came out initially said that how Hindus have no regard for animal lives, and on one hand they revere elephants, and the other hand they murder elephants. And so all kinds of investigations were carried out by the state government, with the central government, forestry departments, all of that. And then it turned out that none of the people who were involved in putting explosives in that explosives in that coconut, none of them were Hindus. And all of a sudden the narrative changed. And the narrative was that, well, these people were trying to take care of wild boars, and elephant ate it by mistake, and it's really the people trying to protect the livelihood, and it's nothing to do with the religion, or nothing to do with the identity of the people who murdered this elephant. None of that. The entire narrative, Utsoda, just changed overnight.
Yes, and that's why I said that there are media sources that only target or present news if they can target a certain community, and I think that comes out of, it's an extension of the mindset that perpetuates colonialism. It's intellectual colonialism in a way, and New York Times has done it, does it every day. BBC does it. You know, many media outlets in India do it, or media outlets in that part of the world do it. It's not unique to that part of the world. It's there everywhere, I would say.
Yeah. Hey, Utsoda, I welcome Harsh Gupta to the show, and he said, "Can you let me say a few words?" And I want to call in, but so Harshji, unfortunately, we haven't figured out a streamlined way of allowing the calls, and we are still kind of evolving as a show. Please type in what you want to say, your comments here, and I will be glad to read them out as the show progresses. But my apologies, we don't have a call-in feature. We don't have a streamlined way of, queuing up the call, screening the call, and presenting the call on the show. So my apologies for that. Uh, but we'll be glad to take your comments online and then read them out. So that the other news item that caught my eyes was that there's a very popular game. It's called Players Unknown Battlegrounds, or PUBG. And in this particular video game, they introduced all these video games nowadays have storylines, and they have a way you can collect extra points and extra power and all of that. And one of the things that PUBG, a game created by a Korean company, did was that people would go and go to a temple and worship and get some extra tokens or extra powers. And it was not a religious shrine associated with any particular mandir, but it was in front of a just a fictitious totem kind of thing. And the entire Muslim world kind of came together and said, this is idolatry and this should be idol worshipping, and they should remove this feature from the game. And PUBG actually did that. So what about the rest of us who think that there is really, that is a legitimate way of worship? Why impose will of one community over the will of all in the world?
I hope the ones who the so-called the community, Muslim community folks who were, I wouldn't say so-called, these were Muslim community members. So those Muslims who were complaining about idol worship on in the PUBG game, I'm sure they complain to YouTube when YouTube shows videos of Muslims walking around the Kaaba in Makkah and say that is idol worship as well. And I'm sure they have the same standard for everything. So they should not have a picture of the Kaaba or the Al-Aqsa Mosque in their living rooms or in their community centers, and because that is actually idol worship too. So let's hope they follow the same standard everywhere. I'm being sarcastic, of course.
Yeah, I understand. So that as we come towards the close of our news items and discussion, I want to wrap it up by saying that this is a really important topic about Hindu mandirs and in the current context. I'd mentioned in the beginning that there are some references that I'll be glad to give out towards the end. But before we do that, I just want to remind everyone that this is Hindu Lounge. It's a weekly current affairs, Hindu issues in America show on Facebook Live, hosted by Utsav Chakrabarti and Ajay Shah. And we come live every week on Sunday at 11 o'clock Eastern, or just about, because as I said earlier, we are still working out all the technical aspects of it, technicalities, and it may take us 5 or 10 minutes into the show after 11 o'clock Eastern to go live. But we always come live at around this time. And we always have two segments, Hindu Seva Act of the Week and Hindu Hater of the Week. And we hold that for the end because everyone is kind of waiting to see who is going to be the Hindu Hater of the Week. So that before I go there, and while I conclude, I promised at the beginning of the show that we are going to give out some references. So there are a couple of books, several books, but at least a couple of prominent books that were published in 1980s and 90s. And these are the books by Ram Swarup, Sitaram Goel, and Arun Shourie, who used to be editor of Indian Express. Ram Swarup and Sitaram Goel were Voice of India and Voice of India publications, and they did a lot of research, and they found at least 3,000 mandirs that were they have documented, fully documented, of how they were conquered and converted into masjids. So those books are available online. We will post, once we have our Hindu Lounge website up and running and all that in next couple of weeks, we'll post all the reference material so people can go and explore that. And of course, the name of the book, the two volumes, it's called Hindu Temples and What Happened to Them. Again, it's Ram Swarup, Sitaram Goel, Arun Shori. And I really urge people to look that. You can do a Google search. I believe there is a website called Reclaim Hindu Mandirs. I may be missing the exact URL. And they have a lot of material on that. We will be posting this stuff on our website as future reference along with this slide deck. I also want to conclude that do not be deterred by the detractors and Hindu haters of the world. Do not be deterred by people like Barkha Dutt, who wrote in the Washington Post when she said that my generation can never forget what happened in December 1992. I was a college student when the central dome of the Ayodhya Babri Masjid, a mosque that stood on the site where Hindus believed that revered God, Lord Rama, was born, was brought down by a rampaging mob. I want to see Barkha Dutt, Utsoda. I want to see Barkha Dutt write that about the Confederate statues coming down. And that is my final comment on this particular topic. And before we move on to Hindu Seva Act of the week, and we move on to the Hindu charity of the Hindu hater of the week, Utsoda, I had promised that I would read. It's a long comment, but I would read what Pinku Dubey had said. And he has said that Exodus Kashmir Hindus, the Hindus of Kashmir Valley, were forced, and it links all of this to what happened in Kashmir Valley. And he also mentions one more thing, but I'm going to ask Pinku Dubey to wait on that last comment about the Kashmiri Sarpanch. That we are going to address in just a minute. Usada, your final comments before, and then please tell us the Hindu charity or Seva Act of the week.
So, Ajay bhai, let me first say the Hindu hater of the week. I bring bad news first. So,
okay.
Actually, there are two Hindu haters of the week. One,
okay, well, we get a bonus one this time.
they are removed from each other in terms of their context, but they need to be mentioned. The first one is, since you brought up Kashmir, the first one is the terrorists, the jihadists who killed the Sarpanch in Anantnag. His name was Ajay Pandita. He used to use the last name Bharti. And he was killed brutally, even though he served his people. He was elected by his people, who were 95% Muslim. He was a native Kashmiri who was forced to leave his home in 1990 and live as a refugee in another part of India. Then he returned back. He was so brave, he returned back to his village in 1995 and lived there amongst some of the people who forced him to leave. And he worked for the people there. He got elected in his constituency, which is 95% Muslim in Jammu and Kashmir. And unfortunately, his journey in trying to bring people together ended last week when he was killed by the Islamists. Many of them are Pakistani supported. It's a whole new conversation in itself. And so the perpetrators of this killing are my first choice for the Hindu hater of the week. And my second name that I would say is an anonymous bunch of people who went and defiled a Hindu temple in Rio Grande Valley in Texas. And they have not been caught yet, but it was a hate crime that was committed in Texas in Rio Grande Valley. And they defaced the Hindu community center. So people who did it, I don't know who they are. And hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll find out. They are the Hindu haters of the week, the anonymous people who did it.
And Utsada, it's not the first mandir that has been defaced in America. Last year, there was a mandir in Atlanta that was where there were things stolen. There were other temples in last 2 years, several of them that have been defaced. We, as World Hindu Council of America or VHPA and Hindu Pact, along with American Hindus Against Defamation, have asked that FBI investigate these as hate crimes against Hindus. And I think uh, this is not an unreasonable demand. I think this is something that, if not handled, and if it perpetuates and if more, then this will become a routine affair. And we want to make sure that an example is set when a Hindu temple is defiled, that this is not something that as a society or as law enforcement we can in America tolerate. This is not this is not American way of life. This is not the American principles of democracy, equality, respect for all. This is certainly something that 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 is something that exhibits hate and has to be investigated as such.
Absolutely. So I would now try to get the good news. And
all right, so Hindu Seva Act of the week.
So this week I have picked Rahul Dubey, a resident of Washington DC. For those who are familiar with Washington DC, he's a resident of DuPont Circle area. As the Hindu Seva, he did the Hindu Seva Act of the week. And the reason I picked him, I don't know if you follow the news in America, but Rahul Dubey was instrumental in giving shelter to a lot of protesters, I must say peaceful protesters, who were trying to run away from police action. I don't want to get into the politics of it. I don't want to get into the people who are doing it. I'm pretty sure I may disagree with many of the things, what the protesters were saying. But I think, living just less than a mile away from the statue of Gandhi that was defaced last week by Islamists who claim to be Black Lives Matter protesters, I think Rahul Dubey represented the value of forgiveness and compassion much better than anybody else by giving shelter to people who were facing police and needed shelter. So I actually nominate Rahul Dubey as the Hindu Seva Act of the week for his Hindu Seva Act of the week.
That is so well put, Utsada. I say that because organizationally we don't even know Rahul Dubey. We have never interacted with him as World Hindu Council of America. We don't know his views about World Hindu Council of America or any of the Hindu activities that any Hindu organization does in America. What we see when we see this kind of humanity in someone who opens his house up to 70 people who are protesting, who are expressing their views, and he welcomes them at his home. That is when we see that kind of humanity. We say that we actually recognize the act that he has done as something that is exemplary, without actually worrying about whether he's part of our organization, whether he's our supporter, not a supporter, because we see good. Utsada, as Hindus, we see good in everyone. Just as we see when we say namaskar or namaste, we see divinity in the other person. So that is not to say that person is completely divine or any of that, but there is divinity in each person, there is goodness in each person, and we see that in each person and we recognize that. And I'm so glad, Utsada, that you picked a person who we saw without knowing any political affiliation, any view on Hindu Dharma, any of that. We saw, and you saw, because you nominated him, some goodness in him, and we recognize that, and that is Hindu Dharma.
Yes, and I think I thought about it a lot, because it's a very politically volatile climate in America and around the world as well. So I thought about it, but I truly believe that the compassion Rahul Dubey showed was worth mentioning and worth noting to the rest of the community. So That's why Rahul Dubey is our Seva Charity Act of the Week.
So, Utsada, thank you very much. This was once again a great conversation. I want to thank everyone who joined Hindu Lounge episode number 9. We look forward to meeting all of you again next week when we do Hindu Lounge episode 10. In the meantime, please stay safe. Please be involved and in the current affairs. Please be out looking for the issues that impact Hindus and participate. I think what American democracy allows everyone is an opportunity to participate in the conversation, participate in the political process, participate in the civic process, civic affairs process. So please participate, please join us, and we will see you all next week. Thank you and namaste. Namaste, Utsoda.
Namaste, Ajay Bhai, and namaste, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.